When experienced federal prosecutors resign en masse from the Department of Justice, it makes brief headlines. When career diplomats leave the State Department in unprecedented numbers, it gets mentioned in trade publications. When CDC scientists depart for private sector jobs, public health journals note the trend. Individually, these departures seem like personal career decisions. Collectively, they represent something far more consequential: the systematic hollowing out of American institutional capacity. This isn't about a single administration or party. This is about a decades-long trend that has accelerated dramatically in recent years. The best and brightest, who once saw government service as the pinnacle of professional achievement, now see it as a career risk to be avoided. And when the talent leaves, what remains isn't just fewer people. It's fundamentally diminished institutional capability that takes generations to rebuild. To understand what's being lost, we need to start with what made American government institutions effective in the first place. After World War II, the United States built the most capable administrative state in human history. The career civil service attracted top talent from elite universities. Working for the State Department or joining the Foreign Service was prestigious. Federal scientific agencies employed world-class researchers. The Department of Justice recruited the best legal minds. This wasn't accidental. It was deliberate policy designed to create professional, merit-based institutions that could implement complex policies regardless of which party held power. The civil service system, established in the late 19th century and expanded throughout the 20th, created career tracks where expertise and competence were rewarded rather than political loyalty. The system worked because it offered something valuable to talented individuals: the opportunity to work on consequential problems with adequate resources and relative job security. Yes, private sector jobs paid more. But government service offered mission-driven work, intellectual challenge, and the satisfaction of serving the public interest. For many highly educated professionals, this was worth the pay differential. But over the past 2 decades, and especially the past 5 years, this value proposition has collapsed. Government service has become professionally risky, intellectually stifling, and personally exhausting in ways that are driving out exactly the people institutions most need to retain. Start with the Department of Justice. In early 2025, reports emerged of mass resignations among career prosecutors. These weren't political appointees who leave when administrations change. These were career attorneys who had served under both Republican and Democratic administrations, who were supposed to provide continuity and institutional memory. Why did they leave? The reasons varied by individual, but common themes emerged: political interference in prosecutorial decisions, pressure to pursue cases without merit or drop cases with merit based on political considerations, public attacks on career prosecutors by political leadership, an institutional culture that increasingly valued loyalty over legal judgment. The specific mechanics of this exodus are revealing. A prosecutor specializing in white-collar crime spent 15 years developing expertise. They investigated Enron executives. They prosecuted Bernie Madoff associates. They built relationships with FBI agents, forensic accountants, and cooperating witnesses. They understood the complex web of shell companies, offshore accounts, and financial instruments used in sophisticated fraud schemes. When political pressure led to dropping a major case for reasons unrelated to legal merit, the prosecutor faced a choice: compromise, professional integrity, or leave. They left. Their replacement might have a law degree and good grades, but lacks the 15 years of accumulated expertise. The replacement will take 5 to 7 years to reach comparable competence, if they stay that long in an environment where experienced colleagues are departing. One former prosecutor, speaking anonymously to avoid professional retaliation, described the situation. "I spent 15 years building expertise in complex financial fraud cases. I trained dozens of younger attorneys. I had institutional knowledge about how these investigations work that you can't learn from a textbook. But when political appointees start dictating prosecutorial decisions based on who the target's friends are, I can't do my job with integrity. So I left." Multiply this pattern across dozens of prosecutors, and the DOJ's capacity to prosecute complex cases degrades substantially. The institution doesn't lose just individuals. It loses the collective expertise that made sophisticated prosecutions possible. This pattern, experienced professionals leaving because they can't do their jobs with integrity, repeats across federal agencies. At the State Department, career Foreign Service officers have been departing at rates significantly higher than historical averages. These are diplomats who spent decades building relationships, learning languages, and developing regional expertise. The numbers tell the story. Between 2016 and 2020, approximately 60% of career ambassadors, the highest rank in the Foreign Service, departed. These weren't retirements at the end of natural career arcs. Many were mid-career exits by diplomats in their peak productive years. The State Department's senior leadership ranks were decimated. Consider what a career ambassador brings. Someone who served multiple tours in Southeast Asia, speaks Thai and Indonesian fluently, knows every relevant government minister personally, understands regional political dynamics, and has cultivated intelligence relationships over decades. That expertise can't be replaced by hiring a political donor who stayed at a Trump hotel and wants an ambassadorship. The State Department exodus reflects multiple factors. Career diplomats found their analysis ignored or contradicted by political appointees with no regional expertise. Ambassadorships increasingly went to political donors rather than career professionals. By some estimates, over 40% of ambassador positions went to non-career appointees, well above historical averages. Foreign Service officers returning from hardship posts found their expertise unwelcome if it contradicted administration preferences. A former senior diplomat explained, "I served in the Middle East for 20 years. I know the region, the languages, the key players. When I write cables explaining why a particular policy won't work, and those cables are ignored because they're politically inconvenient, what's the point? I can make 3 times my government salary consulting for private companies that actually value regional expertise." The ripple effects extend beyond individual departures. Junior Foreign Service officers, seeing experienced colleagues leave and watching political appointees override expertise, recalculate their own career trajectories. Why invest years learning Arabic and serving in dangerous posts if expertise doesn't matter? Many exit before reaching senior levels, creating a missing generation of mid-career professionals who should be developing into future leaders. The CDC and NIH experienced similar brain drain. During the COVID-19 pandemic, public health officials faced unprecedented political pressure, public harassment, and threats to themselves and their families. Scientists who provided evidence-based public health guidance were attacked by political figures and received death threats from radicalized members of the public. Dr. Ann Shuchat, a career CDC official who served for decades, retired in 2021. While she cited personal reasons, colleagues noted the toxic environment where scientific findings were routinely politicized, and public health officials became targets of harassment campaigns. Many of her colleagues followed, taking positions in academia, private healthcare, or simply retiring rather than continuing in an environment where science was subordinated to politics. The pattern extends to intelligence agencies, the EPA, the Department of Education, regulatory agencies, essentially every part of the federal government that requires specialized expertise and institutional memory. The common thread is that career professionals feel they can no longer do their jobs effectively because political considerations override expertise and the personal costs of government service have become intolerable. But why does this matter? Can't we just hire new people? This question reveals a fundamental misunderstanding of how institutional capacity actually works. Institutions don't just need bodies, they need expertise, judgment, and institutional memory that takes decades to develop. Consider what a career prosecutor brings to complex financial fraud cases. They've investigated dozens of cases. They know which investigative techniques work and which waste resources. They understand the legal landscape, what courts will accept as evidence, how defense attorneys operate, what charges are sustainable. They've built relationships with agents at other agencies who provide crucial cooperation. They know the informal processes that make investigations successful beyond what's written in procedures manuals. When that prosecutor leaves, all of that walks out the door. The replacement might be smart and well-educated, but they don't have the accumulated experience. They'll make mistakes the departed prosecutor would have avoided. They'll miss opportunities the experienced prosecutor would have recognized. It will take them years to develop the expertise their predecessor had if they stay long enough to develop it, which becomes less likely when they see experienced colleagues leaving. This is institutional memory and expertise, and it's irreplaceable in the short term. You can't download it from a training manual. You can't learn it in graduate school. It accumulates through years of experience within specific institutional contexts. The State Department provides clear examples. A Foreign Service officer who has served multiple tours in a country develops relationships with local officials, understands political dynamics, speaks the language fluently, and knows how to navigate that country's bureaucracy effectively. This expertise is specific and valuable. When that officer leaves, their replacement starts from zero. No relationships, limited language skills, little contextual understanding. Now multiply this across hundreds of departing diplomats. The institution loses collective expertise that took decades to build. American diplomatic capability actually diminishes because the people who made it effective are gone. The scientific agencies face similar losses. A CDC epidemiologist who has worked on outbreak response for 20 years knows how to coordinate with state health departments, which data sources are reliable, how to communicate risk to the public, and what interventions actually work in real-world conditions. This isn't theoretical knowledge, it's practical expertise developed through experience. When that epidemiologist leaves for a university position or private sector job, the CDC loses not just one person but accumulated institutional knowledge. The next pandemic response will be less effective because experienced people are gone. And training replacements takes years. If qualified replacements can even be recruited when government service seems professionally toxic. Historical parallels are instructive. The Soviet Union experienced severe brain drain in the 1970s and 1980s as talented scientists, engineers, and intellectuals emigrated when possible or shifted to less demanding roles. This wasn't primarily about political dissidence. It was about professional frustration. The best people found their work constrained by political considerations, their expertise ignored by party apparatchiks, and their careers limited by loyalty requirements rather than competence. The specific dynamics are revealing. A Soviet physicist might have world-class training and breakthrough insights, but couldn't pursue research if it contradicted ideological positions. A Soviet economist might understand why central planning wasn't working, but couldn't propose market reforms without being labeled ideologically suspect. A Soviet diplomat might know that a particular foreign policy approach would fail, but couldn't say so if it contradicted party doctrine. The result was systematic talent flight. Those who could emigrate did, leading to the famous wave of Soviet Jewish scientists leaving for Israel and the United States in the 1970s and 1980s. Those who couldn't emigrate often shifted to less politically sensitive work where expertise could still matter, or simply stopped trying to contribute meaningfully and just collected paychecks. The Soviet institutional collapse that became visible in the late 1980s reflected decades of accumulated talent loss. The people running institutions were increasingly second-rate, selected for loyalty rather than competence, lacking the expertise to make good decisions, unable to adapt to changing circumstances. When crisis came, the institutions simply couldn't respond effectively. Gorbachev discovered this when he tried to implement reforms in the late 1980s. He issued directives for economic restructuring, but the institutions lacked personnel capable of designing and implementing market reforms. The competent economists had been marginalized or had emigrated years earlier. What remained were political appointees who understood party loyalty, but not economics. The reforms failed partly because institutional capacity to implement them had been destroyed by decades of brain drain. The United States isn't the Soviet Union, But the dynamic of talent fleeing government service has troubling parallels. When the best people leave, who replaces them? Often, people who couldn't get better jobs elsewhere, or people whose primary qualification is political loyalty rather than expertise. This creates a downward spiral. As institutional quality declines, government service becomes even less attractive to talented people, accelerating further decline. The agencies become staffed by people who lack the expertise to recognize their own limitations. Decision quality deteriorates. Policy implementation fails. The public loses faith in government competence. Contrast this with how China has approached institutional capacity. Through programs like the Thousand Talents Plan, China has aggressively recruited scientific and technical expertise from around the world, including from the United States. Chinese government service, particularly in scientific and technical fields, has become more attractive because it offers resources, support, and prestige. The Thousand Talents Plan, launched in 2008, offered lucrative packages to recruit overseas Chinese scientists and foreign experts to Chinese institutions. Compensation often included high salaries, signing bonuses, generous research funding, lab space, and housing. More importantly, it offered something many American institutions couldn't match: freedom from political interference in research directions and adequate resources to pursue ambitious projects. A Chinese-American scientist who left a U.S. government research position for a Chinese university explained the calculation. In the U.S., my research funding kept getting cut. Every study had to be politically vetted. The infrastructure was aging. In China, I got a state-of-the-art lab, unlimited research funding, and freedom to pursue the science without political constraints as long as results were produced. This isn't just about Chinese nationals returning home. Foreign scientists, including Americans without Chinese heritage, have taken positions in Chinese institutions because the working conditions are better: more resources, less bureaucracy, greater prestige, and importantly, greater respect for expertise. China treats leading scientists as national assets. The United States often treats government scientists as disposable bureaucrats. The result is a shift in institutional capability. As American agencies lose talent, Chinese institutions gain it. This isn't just about individual scientists or engineers. It's about systematic shifts in which nations have the institutional capacity to implement complex policies effectively. China's COVID-19 response capabilities, whatever one thinks of specific policies, reflected strong public health institutional capacity. America's response difficulties partly reflected degraded institutional capability at CDC and FDA. The consequences won't be immediately obvious. Institutions run on momentum. The policies designed by experts who left 5 years ago continue being implemented. The relationships built by departed diplomats still function for a while. The procedures established by experienced professionals still guide current operations. But gradually, as those policies need updating and those relationships need maintaining and those procedures need adapting, the absence of expertise becomes apparent. Decisions get worse. Implementations fail. Crises are mishandled. And people wonder why government seems incompetent, not recognizing that competence left years earlier when the experts departed. The COVID-19 pandemic provided a preview. The initial response failures reflected, in part, institutional capacity problems. CDC and FDA bureaucracies struggled to adapt quickly. Relationships between federal and state health departments were strained. Public health communication was ineffective. Some of this reflected the specific challenges of a novel pandemic, but much of it reflected depleted institutional capacity, the loss of experienced public health professionals who might have navigated challenges more effectively. The Afghanistan withdrawal in 2021 similarly revealed institutional capacity problems at the State Department and Pentagon. The chaotic evacuation reflected, among other factors, a loss of on-the-ground expertise about Afghanistan after years of experienced Afghanistan hands leaving government service. The institutional memory about how to conduct large-scale evacuations had atrophied. These aren't isolated failures. They're symptoms of systematically degraded institutional capacity due to talent exodus. And the trend is accelerating, not reversing. What would reversal require? At minimum, it would require making government service attractive again to talented people. This means several things. First, compensation competitive enough that talented professionals don't face massive pay cuts for government service. Second, protection from political interference, so expertise can actually influence decisions. Third, public respect for government service rather than contempt. None of these seem likely in the current environment. Increasing government salaries faces political opposition. Insulating agencies from political pressure is framed as anti-democratic deep state behavior. Public discourse routinely denigrates government workers as lazy bureaucrats regardless of their actual performance. The alternative paths forward are grim. One possibility is accepting diminished institutional capacity as the new normal. Government becomes less effective. Complex policies fail. The United States declines relative to competitors who maintained institutional capacity. This happens slowly enough that people don't necessarily connect cause and effect. Another possibility is crisis-driven reform, some catastrophic failure, a pandemic managed disastrously, a diplomatic crisis bungled completely, a financial regulation failure causing economic collapse, creates political will for serious institutional reconstruction. But this reform comes after enormous costs have already been paid. A third possibility is fragmentation. The federal government becomes increasingly ineffective, but state governments, private organizations, or international institutions fill gaps where possible. This creates geographic and institutional inequality. Some places and domains function adequately while others fail, but avoids total collapse. The most concerning possibility is replacement of expertise-based institutions with loyalty-based institutions. If competence-based civil service is seen as obstructive, political leaders might conclude that loyalty is more important than expertise. Agencies get staffed with people selected primarily for political reliability. This accelerates institutional decline, but might seem necessary to leaders frustrated by resistant career staff. Historical examples suggest this path leads to systematic institutional failure. When loyalty matters more than competence, people rise based on political connections rather than ability. They make poor decisions because they lack expertise. They surround themselves with similarly unqualified loyalists. The institutional death spiral accelerates. The Soviet Union, again, provides instructive examples. By the 1980s, Soviet institutions were run primarily by political appointees selected for loyalty. Their manifest incompetence, economic policies that didn't work, diplomatic initiatives that backfired, military strategies that failed, reflected systematic prioritization of loyalty over competence. When Gorbachev tried reforms, he discovered institutions lacked the capability to implement them effectively. The Roman Empire's decline similarly involved degradation of institutional capacity. As the civil bureaucracy and military became increasingly politicized, selected more for loyalty than competence, the empire's ability to respond to challenges deteriorated. Barbarian invasions succeeded partly because Roman institutions couldn't mount effective responses. The capable administrators and generals were gone, replaced by political appointees who lacked necessary expertise. The United States isn't Rome in 400 CE or the Soviet Union in 1985, but the pattern of institutional decline through talent exodus and competence degradation is visible. The question is whether it can be arrested before reaching the point where recovery becomes impossible within reasonable timeframes. The answer might depend on whether elite Americans, the people with education and opportunities who might staff federal institutions, see government service as attractive or toxic. Currently, the trend is concerning. Elite university graduates increasingly avoid government careers. Those who do enter government service often leave within a few years. Survey data confirms this. Among recent graduates from top universities, Federal government service ranks far below private sector options in career preferences. This represents a shift from previous generations when prestigious government positions attracted top talent. The shift reflects changing perceptions about what government service offers versus costs. These perceptions aren't just about money. They're about whether government work is meaningful, whether expertise matters, whether institutions function effectively. When talented people look at federal service and see political interference, expertise ignored, and career officials scapegoated, they rationally choose other options. The exodus of institutional talent represents a choice, not by institutions, but by individuals deciding that government service isn't worth the personal and professional costs. Each individual departure makes sense from that person's perspective. Collectively, these rational individual decisions create irrational collective outcomes, institutions that can't function effectively because the capable people are gone. Reversing this requires changing the calculus so talented individuals rationally choose government service. This means compensation, autonomy, prestige, and protection from harassment. It means creating environments where expertise actually influences decisions. It means defending career officials from political scapegoating. Whether American political culture can support these changes is unclear. The current trajectory suggests otherwise, which means the exodus continues. And 20 years from now, when federal institutions manifestly cannot handle complex challenges, people will wonder what happened, not recognizing that the answer walked out the door years earlier when the experts left and were never replaced with people of comparable capability. The institutional exodus is quiet, gradual, and easy to ignore, but its consequences compound over time. Expertise lost today means failures tomorrow. Institutional memory departing this year means crises mishandled next decade. And once institutional capacity degrades past certain thresholds, rebuilding takes generations rather than years. This is what's happening now, a slow-motion institutional collapse through talent exodus. The question isn't whether it's happening. The question is whether it can be stopped before the damage becomes irreversible.